In this week's episode of the Weekly Education, we have been requested how to eat out whilst on plan. So this is going to be catered towards a fat loss phase. So generally with limited amount of calories, how do we stay on plan, and what are some things to consider, and how I would approach it myself, and how I would recommend you as my clients how to approach it going forward. So, some of my favourite places that I kind of like to eat, and I probably stay more in favour to, because it's generally a little bit easier to count, and it's generally got a better choices of foods and more choices that are a little bit macro friendly. Consider how we can approach it and maybe be a little bit more sensible with it. Obviously, depending on the restaurant and where it is and how MyFitnessPal works, obviously it's the foods logged. So if the foods are not on the MyFitnessPal, you'll have to get custom macros or obviously put it in yourself. So these are the foods that I kind of like going to, just to, one, they got quite good high protein choices. They've got very good on digestion, so I don't feel bloated or I feel like it's affecting my digestion throughout the rest of the day, and I don't have any issues off it. And there's plenty of choice. So these are kind of the things that I go to. And then depending on what macros I have left is how I amend. If, say, for certain foods, maybe I take something off, or maybe I'll have a certain meal and go cater to that. So say if I had less carbs, I'll just have a veg and lean protein option. So steakhouses and Nando's are quite good for that. And then if I had some more carbohydrates compared to at the end of the day, and I think that I would want some more carbs with a protein source. Generally, I always have a protein source with every meal. So if I had some more carbs, I'd probably choose sushi or ramen. And then also quite common is roast dinners, but that's still quite you can manipulate it depending on if you're going out for food or if you're making that yourself. So a little bit more difficult when you're not making it yourself with a roast dinner, personally. Okay, so aspects to consider when going out for food is, one, keeping your protein intake optimal. So often when we go out, something that I used to do a lot in the past is you kind of take the opportunity to go completely off plan and end up eating a whole load of carbs and fat, going sky high, and then not actually really considering your protein intake. Obviously, if you don't have the protein intake, it's not as satiating as not having it, so you end up eating more carbs and fats due to the fact that you haven't had the normal protein intake that you normally have. So always consider having an optimal protein intake during your meals out. So that's something that I always consider, does have a protein source in this, otherwise I'm just simply not going to feel full. So keeping your protein intake with an aspect, I always keep that on my forefront of my mind when going out for meals. Also, in another video, I've gone into this with a little bit more detail. Depending on how high your calories are and how your appetite is, you could also bank calories for going out if it was a one-off meal. So you could bank those calories, which means taking the calories down in the beginning of the week and saving them calories for later on. Very similar to banking money, saving money, spending on something a bit more expensive rather than, having the same amount spent every single day. Very similar. Something else is I think that I used to do quite often is I would used to underestimate how much I would have in, and then I'd go to weigh myself on my weighing day, and I'd be like, oh my god, I've put on so much pounds. I was expecting a loss. That was quite good. But that is often due to, we'll probably choose a lower calorie option on the MyFitnessPal if you're choosing the foods. Often when we're going out, we probably should think that it's probably the most calorific option, with a lot of butter and oils that they cook it in, and that is going to crank up the calories quite a lot. So often you probably should overestimate what it is actually at restaurants, as it probably will be most likely the most calorific version of that meal, due to that's why it is a lot more tastier than, say, cooking it at home. So that is the reason for that. You probably should overestimate a little bit with how much calories are being consumed on a meal out. Even though that I've just gone through quite a lot of important bits with aspects to consider with going out, it is still very important to enjoy yourself and being present in that social occasion, and still enjoying yourself. So if you feel like you're not enjoying yourself, if you're not having it, I'd probably say, depending on how many times you go out for meals, if it's not that regular, I'd probably say if you say you only go out a handful times a year for big special occasions, I'd probably say you can probably buffer with having an extra 100 to 200, even more probably, if it's not something that you do so regularly. But if it's quite something that you're doing quite often, this is definitely, you would probably have to be a lot more sensible. But if you say that you only go out maybe only a few times a year, it's probably not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to be much of an adverse effect long term. So you could probably get away with having a little bit more calories. That being said, you still, if you go out often, you remember the main points of going out for food is most likely because of the social occasion and meeting people that you haven't seen in a while. You can still have, you can still communicate and still enjoy that time with that person or family member or friend, and you still enjoy that time with that person. Aim to not overindulge. So often, like I just went into, is when we miss the protein source, we will end up overindulging on carbohydrates and fats. So a massive aspect is still to have self-control, even though you're going into an environment that is most likely going to test that self-control due to being around a lot of high dense calorie foods. So it is testing of your self-control in environments like that, depending on where you're going. So it is going to be a test of your self-control. So don't expect it to be easy, because it won't. But going into the next slide, the reasons why we don't want to overindulge is simply, once the body fat is off, it is off. So if you consider maybe you're doing a 12-week fat loss phase, you complete that 12 weeks, you're not prolonging that period of fat loss. So you're actually minimizing the amount of fat loss that you're minimizing the amount of time that you're in that fat loss phase. If you can get that weight off in a faster amount of time, say if you complete it within 12 weeks, you don't actually have to be in such a prolonged period. If it's someone that you take regular, if you're going over your calories considerably amount and your weight's being a bit stagnant, you're a little bit slower with your fat loss phase, you are going to be in that fat loss phase for a much more prolonged period of time, especially if you're going out for meals out quite often and overindulging in food with your calories. So maybe it's worth considering, maybe thinking, I'm going to be sensible for those 12 weeks, and maybe bank calories ever so often and still have the social occasions, enjoy enjoy the company. But once you complete that fat loss phase and that is completed, and your calories get to be bumped up a little more, you'll be able to enjoy it a whole lot more. So a fat loss phase is not permanent. It is 12 weeks of trying to lose as much body fat as possible. After that, you get to have a little bit more calories and be in that maintenance phase where you get a little bit more food and you get to feel more energized and a little bit more less depleted. So that is something to consider going forward. So this is what I would think when going out for meals, and this is what I'd recommend people when going out. Let me know if you need any more help or any more information. You can always message me privately.